7 years ago, everything I thought I knew about my family fell apart in the most unexpected and heartbreaking way. I was 22 at the time, fresh out of college, full of hopes for the future, but still figuring out how to navigate the adult world. I had just landed my first full-time job, and while it wasn't much, it was enough to get me by. At least, that's what I thought. I was living with my parents at the time, trying to save up enough money to move out on my own. In retrospect, it was a rather ordinary setup for someone in their early 20s. Little did I know, this simple arrangement would soon become a nightmare that would change my life forever. The catalyst for all of this was my sister, Hannah. She was 37 at the time, and despite the 15-year age gap between us, we'd always had a distant relationship. Hannah and I were never close growing up. While our parents had always tried to do their best for us, their attention always seemed to be focused on Hannah. She was the golden child, the one who could do no wrong, the one whose every need was met with eager attention. On the other hand, I was often left to find my own way. It wasn't that I was neglected or unloved. It was just that I never seemed to capture their undivided focus in the way that she did. And for the most part, I was fine with that. I didn't mind being more independent. I had my own friends, my own activities, and didn't crave the constant validation that Hannah did. But that all changed one day when the foundation of our family began to crumble. Hannah had been married to her husband, Pete, for 3 years. Pete was 39, and they had been dating for a while before tying the knot. At least, that's what I thought. I didn't know him too well, but I had no reason to doubt that he was a good guy. He seemed to genuinely love Hannah, or at least that's how it appeared on the surface. They were the picture of a happy couple, or so I thought. I was somewhat surprised when their relationship started to show cracks. I couldn't pinpoint the exact moment things started to go wrong, but I noticed small things. Pete was becoming more distant, and Hannah started complaining about his lack of attention. She even came to me once, telling me that they weren't communicating as well as they used to. She seemed upset, but never enough to indicate something serious. Still, I was hopeful that they could work through it. Most marriages go through rough patches, right? Then, the bombshell dropped. Hannah and Pete got a divorce, and the reasons behind it were devastatingly shocking. I was blindsided when Hannah came to me one evening, her face pale, her eyes red from crying. She was sobbing uncontrollably, her voice shaking as she explained what had happened. According to her, Pete had been having an affair for the past 6 months, an affair with one of my close friends, Emily. My stomach dropped at the mention of her name. Emily? How could that be? Emily was someone I'd known for years, someone I had introduced to Pete, as a matter of fact. I had been the one who suggested they meet after she asked me for some help with her health and nutrition. Pete was a dietitian, and Emily had been struggling with weight loss. She'd come to me asking for advice, and I thought she might benefit from talking to Pete. After all, he was the expert in this area. Now, looking back, I realized just how naive I was. I never thought for a second that Pete would take advantage of that innocent introduction. But that was exactly what happened. Hannah claimed that Pete had been sneaking around with Emily for months, and not only that, but she also accused me of enabling their affair. She blamed me for the divorce because I had introduced them in the first place. The accusation hit me like a physical blow.
How could she say that?
I had no idea that Pete was even interested in Emily in that way. It was ridiculous. Utterly preposterous. But the worst part wasn't just the accusation. It was how quickly my parents took Hannah's side. Without even so much as hearing my side of the story, they immediately sided with her. They believed every word she said, and completely shut me out. To them, I was the villain in this situation. I was the one who had caused their perfect little world to collapse. They ignored the fact that Pete and Emily were both adults who had made their own choices. It didn't matter to them. They were so consumed with pity for Hannah that they couldn't see the bigger picture. My parents didn't just distance themselves from me, they kicked me out of the house. Just like that, after years of living there and contributing to the household, I was thrown out onto the street. I had no place to go, no real savings, and no backup plan. I tried to talk to my parents, to explain that this was all a misunderstanding. I begged them to listen to me, but they refused. My mom wouldn't even take my calls. When I showed up at the house to talk to them, she told me to leave, threatening to call the police if I didn't. It was like I had become a stranger to them, someone they had no connection with anymore. It was devastating. I remember that night vividly. I sat outside their house, a bag of clothes and personal items at my feet, completely lost. I couldn't comprehend how quickly everything had fallen apart. My parents, the people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally, had turned their backs on me. I had no idea where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay there. I called a friend who lived a few miles away, and she graciously let me crash at her place. I was thankful for the offer, but the shame and humiliation I felt were overwhelming. I was 22 years old, and my life had been upended by the actions of people I had trusted most. It felt like I had lost everything: my family, my sense of security, and even my reputation. Days turned into weeks, and I still couldn't get in touch with my parents. The phone calls went unanswered. When I sent messages, they were ignored. It felt like I didn't exist in their world anymore. But the most hurtful part was knowing that they had completely embraced Hannah's narrative. She painted herself as the innocent victim, while I became the scapegoat. They didn't even ask for my side of the story. All they cared about was protecting her. And she, in turn, never apologized for the lies she told or the pain she caused. As the months passed, I had to come to terms with the fact that my family was no longer a part of my life. I tried to move forward, focusing on my work and finding a place to live on my own. It wasn't easy, but slowly I began to rebuild. I started saving money and eventually found a small apartment that I could afford. I learned to rely on myself, and though it was difficult, it made me stronger. It wasn't long before I met Liza. She was smart, caring, and genuine, and I felt an immediate connection with her. We started dating, and over time, my love for her grew deeper. Liza became my anchor in this storm of betrayal and abandonment. With her by my side, I began to heal from the wounds that my family had inflicted on me. We moved in together, and after 2 years of dating, I proposed. It was one of the happiest moments of my life. But as soon as I posted about our engagement on social media, the floodgates opened. My parents, who had spent the last 7 years pretending I didn't exist, suddenly reached out to me. The very people who had kicked me out of their home and abandoned me without a second thought were now contacting me, wanting to be a part of my life again. They expressed their desire to attend my wedding and make amends for the years of silence. The irony of it all was almost too much to bear. After everything they had put me through, after they had sided with Hannah, now they wanted a second chance? And just like that, the truth came flooding back. My family had been complicit in my pain all along. Now, as I prepared to start a new chapter with Liza, I would have to face the consequences of their choices. But little did they know, my life had already moved on. And as for my sister, she had no idea that the truth was about to come to light, and when it did, I would no longer be the one left to pick up the pieces. It had been 7 years since everything had fallen apart. 7 years since I had walked away from my family, feeling betrayed and abandoned. 7 years since I was kicked out of the house by the people who were supposed to love me the most. Those years had been filled with pain, loneliness, and uncertainty, but also with growth. I had built a new life for myself, one that was better in so many ways. I found love in Liza, someone who truly understood me and stood by me when I needed it most. Together, we had made a home of our own, free from the toxic ties of my past. But all of that was threatened the moment my parents reached out again. The message came through my phone like a lightning bolt, unexpected and unwelcome. They had found out about my engagement through a social media post, and now they were desperate to re-enter my life, desperate to be part of the story I was starting to write with Liza. They wanted to attend my wedding, to make amends for the years of silence, and, worst of all, they wanted to pretend like nothing had happened. They seemed to have forgotten how they had turned their backs on me, how they had sided with Hannah, and how they had cast me aside like I was nothing. I couldn't believe it. After everything they had done, after abandoning me when I needed them the most, now they wanted to be a part of my life again. But there was no way I was going to let them waltz back in as if nothing had changed. The truth was too fresh in my mind, and the pain of those years still lingered in my heart. They had betrayed me. They had betrayed me in the worst possible way, choosing to believe the lies my sister had spread about me. My parents had hurt me deeply, and I wasn't about to let them rewrite history, acting like they were innocent victims when they were the ones who had caused so much of my suffering. Liza and I discussed what had happened, and while she was sympathetic to my situation, she could see just how hurt I was. She had heard the story of my family many times before, but now, it felt different. It felt like my past was trying to creep back into my present, threatening to disrupt everything I had worked so hard to build. Liza was my rock, and she always had been. She understood the complexity of the situation better than anyone else could. She supported me, as she always did, but she also encouraged me to think carefully about how to handle the situation. She knew how much I had suffered, but she also wanted to make sure that I wasn't letting the past control me again. As I stewed over the message from my parents, I began to remember everything. The lies, the manipulation, the way they had treated me like I was the villain. I started to wonder if my parents even cared about me at all, or if they were just trying to smooth things over now that their golden child, Hannah, had fallen from grace. I didn't believe for a second that they were truly sorry. If they were, they would have come to me sooner, apologized for the hurt they caused, and made an effort to understand my side of the story. But no. Instead, they wanted to waltz back into my life and act like nothing had happened. I spent the next few days trying to figure out how to respond. Part of me wanted to just cut them off completely, to shut the door on them once and for all. But another part of me, the part that still remembered what it was like to be loved by them, felt conflicted. Could I really shut them out forever? Could I turn my back on the family I had known for so long? The answer became clear the moment I received a phone call from Hannah. Of course, she was the one to call first. The one who had ruined my life, the one who had accused me of causing her divorce, the one who had lied and manipulated everyone to get her way. She was calling me now, and I knew that this was her way of trying to get me to feel sorry for her. I almost didn't pick up, but something in me urged me to do so. Perhaps it was the last vestige of the bond that had once existed between us. When I answered the phone, her voice was as cold and bitter as I remembered. She didn't waste any time with pleasantries. She immediately demanded that I make things right with our parents. I could hear the desperation in her voice, but it was laced with something else, too. Something that I couldn't quite place. It wasn't guilt. It wasn't remorse. It was more like a sense of entitlement. Hannah felt like she deserved something from me, like she had a right to dictate what I did with my life. She didn't care about the years of hurt and betrayal she had caused. All she wanted was for me to fix everything for her. She wanted me to let her back into my life, just like that. I was furious. How could she demand that of me after everything she had done? How could she stand there and pretend like she was the victim? She was the one who had cheated on Pete. She was the one who had lied about me and ruined my relationship with our parents. But now she was calling me, expecting me to forgive her and make things right. It was laughable, really. I told her in no uncertain terms that I owed her nothing. I had spent years of my life trying to pick up the pieces after she had torn everything apart. She had destroyed my relationship with our parents. She had manipulated everyone around her to believe her version of events, and now she expected me to play along. I told her that I had repaid her the favor by telling the truth, by exposing her lies, and that I wasn't going to let her back into my life just because she felt like it. She started crying, her sobs thick and uncontrollable. She tried to guilt-trip me, telling me that I was being a monster for refusing to forgive her. But I wasn't moved. I wasn't the same person I had been 7 years ago. I wasn't the person who had cried in silence, waiting for my family to come back to me. I had grown stronger. I had built a life that was better than the one I had ever imagined for myself. And I wasn't going to let her or anyone else tear that down. When I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief. It was like a weight had been lifted off my chest. For the first time in years, I felt free from the grip of my family's expectations. I was no longer tied to them. I had Liza, and that was enough for me. But the drama didn't end there. A few hours later, Hannah showed up at my apartment unannounced. She had somehow found my address, despite the fact that I had moved several times since leaving my parents' house. I was shocked to see her standing there, her face flushed with frustration and desperation. She immediately started demanding that I make things right with our parents. She accused me of being cruel, of ruining her life. She claimed that I was the one who had caused the rift in the family, not her. I didn't let her in. I didn't want to hear any more of her excuses or manipulations. I told her to leave, but she wouldn't go. Instead, she began banging on my door, screaming at me to listen to her. She was like a child throwing a tantrum, and it was honestly pathetic. I had to call the police to get her to leave. When the officers arrived, she finally relented, but not without leaving me with one last parting shot, a message written on my door in permanent marker, accusing me of being a revengeful monster. It stung, but not in the way she probably thought it would. Her words no longer had the power to hurt me. I had been through too much to let her or anyone else make me feel guilty for standing up for myself. A few days later, I received yet another message from my parents. This time, it wasn't a phone call. It was a long, drawn-out text message filled with anger and confusion. They demanded to know why I was being so harsh on Hannah, why I couldn't just forgive her and move on. They still believed the lies she had told them about me. They still couldn't see the truth, even after everything that had happened. I laughed at the message. It was almost absurd how they thought they could just waltz back into my life as if nothing had happened. But there was no way I was going to let them rewrite the past. I had moved on. I had built a new life without them, and I wasn't about to let them back in. With Liza by my side, I finally made the decision to cut ties with my family for good. I blocked their numbers, ignored their messages, and made it clear that I wasn't interested in their attempts to manipulate me into forgiving them. I had found my own path, one that didn't require them. I had Liza, and that was more than enough. Thank you for watching this video. Don't forget to subscribe and hit notification bell to stay updated.